They told him a child couldn't survive in the wilderness, that his mountain was too harsh, too isolated, too dangerous for a 7-year-old boy. But when Marcus Webb opened that buried vault beneath the frozen ground, what he found didn't just prove them wrong. It exposed a government secret so explosive it would shake the foundation of everything those same authorities had built their power on. And the boy they tried to take away, he became the key to unlocking it all. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. Tell us where in the world you are watching from. Let's get started. The first snow of the season dusted the peaks above Red Pine, Montana, turning the jagged ridgeline into something that looked like broken teeth against a steel-gray sky. Down in the valley, where the town huddled against the cold like it had for the past 140 years, people gathered at Martha's Diner, the kind of place where coffee was always hot and gossip was always hotter. They whispered about the man who lived up there in those unforgiving mountains, the hermit, the crazy one, Marcus Webb. He was 43 years old, though the mountains had carved lines into his face that made him look older. Broad-shouldered and lean, with hands that were scarred from years of building, fixing and surviving, Marcus moved through the wilderness like he was part of it. His hair had gone grey at the temples early, and his eyes carried the kind of weight that comes from seeing too much and trusting too little. He'd been living off-grid for nearly 8 years now, ever since he walked away from everything that civilization promised and delivered nothing but lies. Marcus had been a military engineer once, the kind of man who could look at a blueprint and see not just what was drawn, but what was missing, what would fail, what would last. He'd served 2 tours overseas, came back with commendations and a head full of noise he couldn't quiet. The military had taught him discipline, precision, and how to survive in places that wanted you dead. But it was what happened after the service that broke something in him. He'd worked for a defense contractor, designing systems that were supposed to save lives. Then he discovered the company was selling those same designs to the highest bidder, no questions asked, no allegiance required. When he blew the whistle, they buried him, destroyed his reputation, made him untouchable. So he disappeared. Bought 270 acres of raw mountain land with what little savings he had left and built a life with his own 2 hands. No electricity from the grid, no running water from the county. Just him, the wilderness, and a stubborn refusal to let the world grind him down any further. His compound sat at 7,800 feet elevation, tucked into a valley between 2 ridges. He'd built the main cabin himself from timber he'd felled and milled. Solar panels he'd scavenged and repaired lined the southern roof. A greenhouse sat behind the cabin, its glass panels salvaged from an abandoned gas station 3 towns over. He had a root cellar dug deep into the hillside, a workshop stocked with tools he'd collected over the years, and a stream that ran cold and clear year-round. People in Red Pine thought he was crazy. They said you couldn't live like that. Not anymore. Not in the 21st century. But Marcus didn't care what they thought. He'd learned that the hard way. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Until the call came. It was late September 2023 when his satellite phone rang. He almost didn't answer. The only people who had that number were a couple of old military buddies and his sister, Emma. He picked up on the 4th ring. Marcus. The voice on the other end wasn't Emma. It was a woman he didn't recognize, formal and careful. My name is Patricia Holders. I'm with Montana Child Protective Services. I'm calling about your nephew Owen. Marcus's chest tightened. What about him? I'm very sorry to inform you that your sister Emma and her husband David were killed in a car accident 3 days ago. A semi-truck ran a red light in Billings. The world went silent except for the wind pushing through the pine trees outside. Marcus sat down hard on the wooden bench beside his workbench. Emma, his baby sister, the only family he had left after their parents died, gone. Mr. Webb, are you still there? Yeah, he managed. I'm here. Owen is currently in temporary foster care. According to your sister's will, you're listed as his legal guardian. Marcus blinked. Me? Yes, sir. I understand you live in a rather remote location. We'll need to conduct a home visit and assessment before any custody arrangement can be finalized. But given the circumstances, the court would like to expedite this process. Can you come to Billings for a hearing next week?" He looked around his cabin, at the wood-burning stove, at the shelves lined with canned goods and dried herbs, at the rifle mounted above the door, at the life he'd built specifically to avoid complications like this. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I'll be there." 6 days later, Marcus walked into a courthouse in Billings wearing the only clean button-down shirt he owned and boots he'd scrubbed until the mud finally gave up. The courtroom was small, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the kind of place where lives were decided in 15-minute increments. Patricia Holders sat at a table with a stack of files. She was in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back tight, glasses perched on her nose. She looked at him the way people always did when they found out where he lived, like he was something dangerous that hadn't bitten yet. Across the room, a small boy sat beside another social worker. Owen. Marcus hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. The kid was 7 now, skinny, with his mother's dark eyes and a silence that seemed too heavy for someone so young. He wore a donated jacket 2 sizes too big and sneakers that had seen better days. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Carolyn Brennan was in her 60s, grey hair cropped short, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She sat, opened the file in front of her, and looked up at Marcus. "Mr. Webb," she began, "you understand why you're here?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Your sister named you as Owen's guardian. However, I have some concerns." She glanced down at the file. "You live alone in an off-grid residence approximately 40 miles from the nearest town. No traditional utilities, no nearby school, limited access during winter months." She looked up. "How exactly do you propose to care for a 7-year-old child in those conditions?" Marcus met her gaze. "I can provide for him. I've been living off that land for 8 years. I've got shelter, food, clean water. I can homeschool him. He'll be safe." Patricia stood. "Your Honor, with all respect to Mr. Webb's survival skills, we're talking about a child who just lost both parents. He needs stability, structure, access to medical care, socialization with other children. Mr. Webb's lifestyle, while admirable in some respects, is not conducive to raising a traumatized child." "He's my nephew," Marcus said, his voice low. "He's family." "Family isn't just blood, Mr. Webb. It's providing what a child needs to thrive." The judge tapped her pen against the file. "Miss Holders, what's your recommendation?" "Foster placement with a family in Billings. Owen would have access to schools, counselors, medical care. We can arrange visitation with Mr. Webb." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He looked at Owen. The kid was staring at the floor, small hands gripping the edge of the chair. He looked lost, scared, alone. "Your Honor," Marcus said. "Can I speak to him, just for a minute?" Judge Brennan hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly." Marcus walked over and knelt in front of Owen. Up close, he could see the dark circles under the boy's eyes, the way his shoulders hunched inward like he was trying to disappear. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said softly. "You remember me?" Owen nodded once. "I know this is scary. I know you miss your mum and dad. I do too." Marcus swallowed hard. "But if you want to come stay with me, I promise I'll take care of you. It won't be easy. It's going to be different than what you're used to. But you'll be safe. And you won't be alone." Owen looked up at him, eyes searching. "Do you have Wi-Fi?" Despite everything, Marcus almost smiled. "No, kid, no Wi-Fi." "TV?" "Nope." Owen thought about that. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Do you want me?" Marcus's throat tightened. "Yeah, Owen, I do." The boy nodded slowly. Then he looked at the judge. "I want to go with him." Judge Brennan leaned back in her chair and sighed. She looked at Patricia, then at Marcus, then at Owen. "Against my better judgment," she said finally, "I'm going to grant temporary custody to Mr. Webb. Temporary, Mr. Webb. That means Miss Holders will be conducting monthly home visits. If at any point I feel that Owen is not receiving adequate care, this arrangement will be terminated immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor. Miss Holders, I want a full report on my desk after the first visit." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, Your Honor. As they left the courthouse, Marcus carrying Owen's single duffel bag of belongings, Patricia pulled him aside. Mr. Webb, I want to be clear. I will be watching closely. That child has been through trauma. If I see any sign of neglect, any indication that he's not being properly cared for, I will remove him. Is that understood? Marcus looked at her evenly. He'll be fine. You can't keep a kid alive up there, she said quietly. Not long term. Winter's coming. You're 40 miles from a hospital. What if he gets sick? What if there's an emergency? Then I'll handle it. She shook her head. I hope you know what you're doing. So did he. The drive back to the mountain took 3 hours. Owen sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's battered Ford pickup, staring out the window as the landscape shifted from flat plains to rolling hills to steep ridges covered in pine and spruce. The kid didn't say much. Marcus didn't push. Grief had a way of stealing words. They stopped once at a general store in Red Pine to pick up supplies. Marcus noticed the looks they got. He'd become a ghost story in this town, the crazy hermit who thought he could live like it was 1870. Now he had a kid with him. The whispers started before they even made it to the counter. That's Marcus Webb, someone muttered. Heard he's taking in his dead sister's boy. Up on that mountain, in winter. That's child endangerment. Someone should call someone. Marcus paid for the supplies, loaded them into the truck, and drove out of town without acknowledging any of it. Owen watched him carefully. Do they not like you? The boy asked. They don't understand me, Marcus said. There's a difference. The final stretch of road was barely a road at all, just 2 tire tracks carved into the hillside. The truck climbed steadily, engine grinding, until they finally crested a ridge and the valley opened up before them. The cabin sat nestled among the trees, smoke curling from the chimney Marcus had lit that morning before leaving. Solar panels gleamed in the afternoon sun. The greenhouse glass caught the light like a jewel. Owen stared. You live here? We live here, Marcus corrected. He parked the truck and helped Owen out. The kid stood in the clearing, looking around like he'd landed on another planet. And in a way, he had. Come on, Marcus said. I'll show you around. Inside, the cabin was simple but solid. One main room with a kitchen area, a wood-burning stove, a table Marcus had built from reclaimed lumber, and shelves lined with books, tools, and supplies. A ladder led to a loft where Marcus slept. He'd already set up a small bed in the corner of the main room for Owen, near the stove where it would stay warmest. It's not much, Marcus said, but it's home. Owen set his duffel bag down slowly. He looked at the oil lamps, the hand pump for water, the wood stove. No light switches, no outlets, no screens. What do you do here? He asked. Marcus thought about that. Live, work, read, think, fix things when they break, build things when I need them. That's it? That's everything, kid. That night, Marcus made dinner. Venison stew with vegetables from the greenhouse, bread he'd baked 2 days earlier. Owen picked at it cautiously at first, then ate like he hadn't had a real meal in days. Probably hadn't. After dinner, as darkness settled over the valley, Marcus lit the oil lamps. The warm glow filled the cabin with shadows that danced against the log walls. Owen sat on his bed, knees pulled to his chest, watching the fire in the stove. You okay? Marcus asked. Owen shrugged. I don't know. That's fair. Do you miss her? Owen asked quietly. My mum? Marcus sat down in the chair across from him. Yeah, every day. She was my little sister. Used to follow me everywhere when we were kids. Drove me crazy. She talked about you sometimes, Owen said. Said you were smart but stubborn. Marcus smiled faintly. She wasn't wrong. She said you left because the world made you sad. The smile faded. Something like that. Owen looked at him. Are you still sad? Marcus considered the question. Sometimes, but not as much up here. Why? Because up here, things make sense. You work, you eat, you build, you have shelter, you prepare, you survive. There's no lying, no pretending, just you and the mountain. Owen thought about that. Then he lay down, pulling the wool blanket up to his chin. "Uncle Marcus?"
Yeah?
"Thank you for wanting me." Marcus's chest ached. "Get some sleep, kid. Tomorrow I'll start teaching you how this all works." The first weeks were hard. Owen struggled with the isolation, the silence, the absence of everything he'd known. No cartoons, no video games, no friends down the street. Just wind, trees, and a man who barely knew how to talk to children. But Marcus was patient. He started small. He taught Owen how to pump water from the well, how to carry firewood without dropping it, how to identify animal tracks in the snow. He showed him which plants were safe to eat and which would make you sick. He explained how the solar panels worked, how to read the battery levels, how to ration power when the sun didn't shine for days. At night, after dinner, Marcus would pull out books, not kids' books, but real ones. History, science, literature. He'd read aloud while Owen listened, the boy's eyes growing heavy by the fire. Sometimes Owen would ask questions. Marcus always answered as honestly as he could. "Why did you become an engineer?" Owen asked one night. "Because I like understanding how things work, and I like fixing what's broken." "Can you fix everything?" Marcus looked at him. "No, buddy. Some things stay broken." By the end of the first month, Owen had changed. His face had color in it from being outside. His hands were developing calluses. He could split kindling without Marcus's help and could start a fire in the stove on the first try. He was learning to read the sky, to predict weather, to move quietly through the woods. When Patricia arrived for her first welfare check, driving a county SUV up the rutted road with visible difficulty, she found Owen outside helping Marcus repair a section of the greenhouse frame. The boy was focused, handing tools when asked, his small hands steadying the glass while Marcus secured it. Patricia got out of her vehicle, clipboard in hand, expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Webb." "Miss Holders." Marcus didn't stop working. "Give me a minute to finish this." She watched as he and Owen completed the repair, moving together with an easy rhythm. When they were done, Owen noticed her and waved shyly. "Hi, Miss Patricia." "Hello, Owen. How are you?" "Good. Uncle Marcus taught me how to fix glass, and yesterday I learned how to make bread." She blinked. "You made bread?" Owen nodded enthusiastically. "It's hard, but it's cool. You have to knead it a lot or it doesn't rise right." Patricia looked at Marcus. "Can we talk inside?" In the cabin, she conducted her inspection. She checked the sleeping area, the food storage, the water supply. She reviewed the homeschool curriculum Marcus had set up, math and reading workbooks, science experiments they could do with household items, history books. She interviewed Owen privately, asking about his daily routine, whether he felt safe, whether he had everything he needed. Owen answered honestly. "It's different, but I like it. Uncle Marcus is teaching me stuff, real stuff." When she was done, Patricia sat across from Marcus at the table. Her expression was complicated. "I'll be honest, Mr. Webb. I came here expecting to find a child living in squalor. I was prepared to remove Owen today." Marcus said nothing. "But he's healthy, he's engaged, he's learning. The curriculum you've established is actually above grade level." She paused. "However, I still have concerns. Winter is coming. You're isolated. What happens if there's a medical emergency?" "I have a satellite phone. I can reach emergency services." "Response time up here would be over an hour. I'm trained in field medicine, military." "You're not a doctor." "No," Marcus agreed. "But I know how to keep someone alive until help arrives." She studied him. "The town is talking, Mr. Webb. People are concerned. They think you're putting Owen at risk." "The town doesn't know what they're talking about." "Maybe not. But perception matters. If enough people complain, the court will review this placement regardless of my reports." Marcus leaned forward. "That kid has lost everything. His parents, his home, his whole life. What he needs is stability. Someone who shows up. Someone who doesn't give up on him." His voice was steady but hard. "I'm not going to let a bunch of people who've never been up here decide what's best for him based on gossip and fear." Patricia held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stood. "I'll file my report. You have 1 month until my next visit. I suggest you prepare for increased scrutiny." After she left, Marcus stood on the porch, watching her SUV disappear down the mountain. Owen came to stand beside him. "Is she going to take me away?" the boy asked quietly. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "Not if I can help it." But the pressure didn't ease. It intensified. Within 2 weeks, the Red Pine Town Council had filed a formal complaint with Child Protective Services. Anonymous calls came in reporting dangerous living conditions, inadequate education, child labor. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. The perception had taken root. Patricia's second visit came early. She brought a colleague this time, a man named Robert from the county office. They interviewed Owen separately again, inspected every corner of the property, reviewed his schoolwork with a fine-tooth comb. Robert asked questions designed to trap, to find inconsistencies. "Does your uncle ever leave you alone?" "Sometimes when he's checking the perimeter or hunting, but not for long." "What do you do when he's gone?" "Read. Practice knots. Sometimes I work in the greenhouse." "Are you ever scared?" Owen thought about that. "Not really. Uncle Marcus taught me what to do if something happens. And I have the emergency radio." They found nothing actionable, but Robert made his position clear as they prepared to leave. "Mr. Webb, you're living on borrowed time. One mistake, one injury, one complaint that sticks, and this arrangement ends." That night, after Owen had gone to sleep, Marcus sat outside in the cold, staring up at the stars scattered across the black sky like broken glass. He knew they were watching, waiting for him to fail. Part of him wondered if they were right, if he was being selfish, keeping Owen up here when the boy could have an easier life down in the valley. But then he thought about the kid he'd met in that courtroom, lost, scared, alone. And he thought about the kid who now split wood with confidence, who asked questions about everything, who smiled when he successfully identified animal tracks in the snow. That kid was healing, growing, becoming someone. Marcus couldn't give up, not on Owen, not on this. He stood and walked to the edge of the clearing where the land sloped down toward the valley. The moonlight caught something strange in the hillside, a subtle depression in the earth he'd noticed before, but never investigated. The ground there didn't quite match the surrounding terrain. It was too flat, too regular. He made a mental note to check it in the morning. Right now, he had bigger problems to solve. But that irregularity in the earth, that small detail that didn't fit the pattern, would change everything. Neither of them knew it yet, but buried beneath that frozen ground was a secret that had been waiting for 50 years. A secret that would prove to the world that Marcus Webb wasn't just capable of keeping a child alive in the wilderness. He was capable of exposing the truth they'd killed to hide. Winter arrived early that year, dumping 3 feet of snow across the valley by mid-November. The world turned white and silent, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears until you heard your own heartbeat. 6 months had passed since Owen first arrived at the compound, and the transformation in the boy was remarkable. He'd grown taller, stronger, his face losing that hollow look that grief carves into children. His hands were rough now, capable. He could identify tracks in fresh snow, predict weather patterns by reading the sky, and recite the periodic table while skinning a rabbit for dinner. Marcus watched him sometimes when the kid didn't notice, watched him work through math problems at the kitchen table with the same focused intensity Marcus once brought to engineering blueprints. Owen absorbed knowledge like the earth absorbed rain, hungry and grateful for it. He'd stopped asking about television or video games months ago. Now he asked about thermodynamics, about why certain trees grew at certain elevations, about how Marcus had designed the water filtration system. Their days had settled into a rhythm that felt almost sacred. Wake before dawn, start the fire, prepare breakfast together, spend mornings on academics, mathematics, literature, science, history. Owen was reading at a 9th grade level now, working through books Marcus pulled from the shelves he'd collected over the years. Afternoons were practical skills. Building, repairing, learning to read the forest like a book written in tracks and broken branches. "Uncle Marcus," Owen asked one morning in late November, looking up from a book about the Cold War, "what's mutually assured destruction?" Marcus paused while sharpening an axe blade. "It's a military strategy from the 1950s and 60s. The idea that if two countries both have enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other completely, neither one will actually use them because it would mean their own destruction too." "That's stupid," Owen said flatly. "Yeah, kid, it was." "Did it work?" Marcus thought about that. "We're still here, aren't we?" "I guess," Owen frowned. "But they built all those weapons anyway, and all those bunkers. Mum told me once that Grandpa worked on something like that, before he left." Marcus's hand stilled on the whetstone. "What?" "Grandpa, your dad. Mum said he worked for the government doing secret stuff. Then he just left one day and never came back." Marcus set the axe down carefully. Their father, a man he barely remembered. Just fragments, the smell of cigarette smoke, rough hands, a voice that rarely spoke. He'd disappeared when Marcus was 8 and Emma was 4. Their mother said he'd abandoned them, run off with another woman, or just gotten tired of family life. She died angry at him, carrying that bitterness to her grave. "I didn't know your mom told you that," Marcus said quietly. "She didn't like talking about him. But one time I asked why I only had one grandma and she told me." Owen looked up. "Did he really just leave?" "I don't know, buddy. That's what we were told." But something about that conversation stuck with Marcus. It circled in his head while he worked, while he taught, while he lay awake at night listening to Owen's steady breathing across the cabin. His father, government work, secret projects, the early 1970s, the same time period as all those Cold War programs Owen was reading about. By early December, the pressure from town had reached a fever pitch. Patricia's visits had increased to every 2 weeks. Each time she brought different officials, people from the county education board, health inspectors, even a child psychologist who spent an hour talking to Owen and emerged looking confused because the kid was clearly thriving. But the town council wouldn't let it go. They'd started a petition, gathered over 200 signatures demanding Owen be removed from Marcus's custody. "They're saying you're brainwashing him," Patricia said during her latest visit, her voice tired, "that you're raising him in a cult-like environment." "A cult of 2? Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I'm telling you what they're saying, not what I believe." She sighed. "Mr. Webb, Marcus, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen real abuse, real neglect. This isn't that. But I'm running out of ways to defend you. The town is calling for another hearing. The judge is under pressure." "So what do I do?" "I don't know. Prove them wrong in a way they can't argue with. Show them something undeniable." She paused. "Or prepare to fight the hardest battle of your life." After she left, Marcus stood on the porch, watching snow fall in thick curtains across the valley. Owen came to stand beside him, wrapped in the wool coat Marcus had taught him to waterproof with beeswax. "Are they going to take me away?" Owen asked. He'd asked this question before, but now there was something different in his voice. Not fear, anger. "They're going to try. I don't want to go. I like it here. I like learning real things. I like having you." Marcus put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then we don't give them a reason. We keep doing what we're doing. We keep proving them wrong every single day." But even as he said it, he wondered how long determination could hold back the weight of bureaucracy and small-town judgment. The storm hit on December 18th. The Weather Service had predicted snow, but they hadn't predicted this. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 3 hours. Wind screamed down from the peaks, shaking the cabin's walls. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see 10 feet beyond the windows. Marcus checked the generator, the propane tanks, the food stores. They were prepared. They were always prepared. Owen helped him secure the greenhouse, reinforcing the panels against the wind. They brought firewood onto the porch, enough to last a week if necessary. They filled every container with water in case the pipes froze. By nightfall, the storm was a living thing, howling and clawing at their little compound like it wanted to tear them from the mountain. "Is this normal?" Owen asked, watching the wind bend trees almost double. "For up here? Yeah, this is why we prepare." They ate dinner by lamplight, venison stew and fresh bread, while the storm raged outside. Marcus read aloud from Jack London's Call of the Wild, his voice steady against the chaos. Owen listened, eyes reflecting firelight, already understanding the story in a way city kids never could. The storm lasted 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, the world fell silent. Marcus opened the door to find the valley transformed. Snow had drifted against the cabin in waves 8 feet high. The greenhouse was buried. The solar panels were covered. Everything was white and still and breathtaking. "Whoa!" Owen breathed beside him. They spent the morning digging out, shoveling paths, clearing panels, checking for damage. The greenhouse had held. The cabin was solid. They'd survived without power, without help, just 2 people and good preparation. It felt like a victory. It was while they were clearing the path to the workshop that Owen noticed it. "Uncle Marcus, what's that?" He pointed down the slope toward the irregular patch of ground Marcus had noticed months ago. The massive snowfall, followed by sudden runoff, had triggered a small mudslide. Part of the hillside had given way, and something metallic gleamed in the exposed earth. Marcus stopped shoveling. He moved closer, boots sinking into the wet snow. There, protruding from the mud and rock, was a corner of reinforced concrete. Steel rebar jutted from it at precise angles, and barely visible beneath the grime, stenciled letters, U.S. property. His heart started to pound. He recognized that construction. Military grade, Cold War era. He'd seen specs for structures like this during his service. "Owen, get the climbing rope from the workshop." "What is it?" "I don't know yet, but we're going to find out." They worked for hours, carefully excavating around the structure. The more they uncovered, the more impossible it became. This wasn't just a concrete wall. It was the corner of a massive underground facility. The concrete was 3 feet thick, reinforced with steel. As they dug deeper, they found the edge of a doorway, the frame solid and heavy, designed to withstand blast pressure. Marcus's engineering mind kicked into overdrive. This kind of construction required serious planning. Heavy equipment, multiple contractors. Yet there were no records of anything like this on his property. He'd reviewed every survey, every title document when he bought the land. Nothing. This facility had been built and then deliberately erased from all official records. "Why would someone build this here?" Owen asked, his face flushed from exertion. "I have a few theories, none of them good." Over the next week, they excavated methodically. Marcus taught Owen proper archaeological technique, documenting everything, photographing angles, measuring depth. The door itself was a masterpiece of engineering. Solid steel, 18 inches thick, with a wheel lock system that required a specific combination. Marcus examined it carefully. The lock mechanism was military standard from the early 1970s. He'd studied these systems in training. Theoretically, he knew how to bypass it, but that would take time and the right tools. He spent 3 days in his workshop fabricating what he needed. Owen helped, holding pieces steady, learning how torque and leverage worked, how metal could be convinced to do things it didn't want to do. They ate meals beside the exposed entrance, neither willing to leave it unattended. Something about the structure pulled at Marcus. Not just curiosity, something deeper, a feeling he couldn't name. On the 4th day, he was ready. The bypass tool slid into place. Marcus applied pressure carefully, feeling for the give. The mechanism was old but well-maintained, sealed against moisture and time. Someone had built this to last. "Stand back," he told Owen. The wheel turned. Something inside the door shifted, with a deep grinding sound that echoed down into darkness. Then, with a hiss of escaping air, the seal broke. The door swung inward on hinges that, impossibly, still moved smoothly. Beyond was a darkness so complete it seemed solid. Marcus grabbed his high-powered flashlight. He stood at the threshold, heart pounding. Owen pressed close beside him, barely breathing. "What do you think is down there?" the boy whispered. "Only one way to find out." He stepped into the darkness, flashlight beam cutting through the black. His boots hit metal grating. The air was cold, dry, perfectly preserved. The beam revealed a stairway leading down, metal steps descending into the earth. The walls were concrete, pipes running along the ceiling, military conduit, electrical systems that had been shut down decades ago. Marcus descended slowly, testing each step. Owen followed, one hand on his uncle's shoulder. 20 steps down, 30. The temperature dropped with each level. 50 steps. Then the stairs ended at another door, this one already ajar. Marcus pushed it open. The hinges creaked in protest. His flashlight swept across the space beyond and he froze, unable to process what he was seeing. It was an underground facility, massive, stretching beyond the reach of his light. But this wasn't just a bunker. This was a laboratory, a research station. Equipment covered in dust lined the walls, some of it recognizable. Microscopes, centrifuges, monitoring stations. Some of it completely foreign. Strange configurations of wires and metal that Marcus couldn't identify even with his engineering background. What happens next will change everything they thought they knew about Marcus's father, expose a government conspiracy buried for 50 years, and give them the proof they need to silence the doubters forever. Stay tuned to see what they discover in the darkness. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus moved deeper into the facility, Owen close behind. The main room branched into multiple corridors, each one lined with doors. Metal placards beside each entrance. Lab 1, Lab 2, storage, decontamination, personnel quarters. This wasn't just a facility. This was a fully operational underground research base. "Uncle Marcus," Owen's voice was small. "What is this place?" "I don't know, kid, but it's big, really big." They explored carefully, methodically. Each room revealed more impossibilities. In Lab 1, they found workstations still set up as if the scientists had just stepped away for lunch. Coffee cups sat beside notebooks filled with equations Marcus only half understood. Chemical formulas, physics calculations, weapon yield projections. In Lab 2, the equipment was more sophisticated. Radiation monitoring devices, lead-lined containment units, warning signs about exposure levels. Marcus's blood ran cold. This was weapons research, nuclear research, hidden beneath Montana wilderness where no one would ever think to look. The storage room was filled with filing cabinets, hundreds of them, all unlocked, all filled with documents stamped classified and top secret and for authorized personnel only. Marcus pulled files randomly. Project Sentinel, Project Coldfire, Project Mountain Shield, all dated between 1968 and 1973. They were developing something here, Marcus said, more to himself than Owen. Something they didn't want anyone to know about. Owen had wandered to the far wall, where photographs hung in frames, protected by glass. Scientists in white coats, military officials in dress uniform, group photos of research teams standing proudly beside equipment. "Uncle Marcus," Owen's voice was strange. "You need to see this." Marcus joined him. Owen was pointing at one particular photograph. A group of 10 men and women in lab coats, standing in front of a large cylindrical device. The photo was dated March 1973. And there, in the back row, third from the left, was a man Marcus recognized, even though he'd been 8 years old the last time he'd seen him. His father, David Webb. Marcus's hand trembled as he lifted the frame from the wall. He turned it over. On the back, someone had written names and roles. Project Sentinel Research Team, lead engineer, David Webb. "That's Grandpa," Owen whispered. Marcus couldn't speak. His father hadn't abandoned them. He'd been here, working on classified government research in a facility that officially didn't exist. He stared at the photograph, at his father's face. The man looked tired even in the picture, but his eyes held something. Determination, maybe. Or fear. They moved through the facility with new urgency. In the personnel quarters, they found bunks, personal items, photographs of families tucked beside beds. These people had lived here. some for months at a time based on the logs Marcus found. His father's bunk was in the corner, marked with a small nameplate, David Webb, lead engineer. Marcus opened the footlocker at the end of the bunk. Inside were personal effects, clothes, a watch, a wedding ring. Marcus picked up the ring with shaking hands. He remembered this ring. Remembered his father's hand ruffling his hair, the metal cool against his scalp. Beneath the clothes were letters, dozens of them, addressed to his mother, to him, to Emma, all unsent. Marcus opened one, dated April 1973. My dearest Sarah, I know you must hate me for being gone so long. I know the children must think I've abandoned them, but I can't tell you where I am or what we're doing here. They said it was a matter of national security. They said we were protecting the country. I believed them. I'm not sure I believe them anymore. There are things happening here, things we weren't told about. The radiation levels aren't what they claimed. The safety protocols are insufficient. I've tried to raise concerns, but they won't listen. I'm scared, Sarah. Scared of what we're building. Scared of what happens if something goes wrong. If you're reading this, tell Marcus and Emma that I love them, that I never wanted to leave, that I fought to come home. David. Marcus's vision blurred. He sat down hard on the edge of the bunk, the letter trembling in his hands. Owen stood beside him, reading over his shoulder. He didn't leave, Owen said softly. He was trapped here. Marcus opened another letter, then another, each one more desperate than the last. His father had tried to blow the whistle, had documented safety violations, radiation exposure incidents, problems with the reactor core they were building. The final letter was dated July 14th, 1973. Sarah, something is very wrong. The containment system has been showing irregularities for weeks. I've filed reports, but they're being ignored. The project director says we're too close to completion to stop now. We're scheduled to conduct a full system test tomorrow. I've asked to delay it until we can review the safety protocols. They've denied my request. I'm going to refuse to participate. I know that means court-martial, but I can't be part of this anymore. If I don't make it out, please know that I tried. I love you. I love our children. I'm sorry. David. Marcus stood abruptly and moved back into the main corridor. There had to be more. Records of what happened, why the facility was sealed, why his father never came home. He found it in what must have been the project director's office. A safe, already opened, perhaps blown open decades ago by whoever cleaned this place out. Inside were final reports, incident documentation, and one memo dated July 15th, 1973. Incident report. Catastrophic containment failure during Project Sentinel test sequence. Radiation leak in primary chamber. Full facility lockdown initiated. 15 personnel confirmed deceased. 0 survivors. Site to be sealed and classified under national security protocols. All records to be destroyed. Families to be notified of classified training accidents. End report. 15 people. His father and 14 others. Dead in a test that should never have been conducted. And the government had sealed it up, buried it, erased every trace, told the families lies. Classified training accident. His mother had never known the truth. She'd died believing her husband had abandoned her. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Rage and grief fought for control all these years. All the pain his mother carried. All the questions he'd never gotten answers to. Because some bureaucrats decided it was easier to bury the truth than admit they'd killed 15 people in an illegal research program. Uncle Marcus? Owen's voice pulled him back. The boy was holding another file. This says the land was purchased by the government in 1967, but it also says it was supposed to be returned to the original owners after the project concluded. Marcus took the file. Land acquisition documents. The property coordinates matched his acreage exactly. The government had bought this land, built this facility, sealed it after the disaster, and then somehow the land had ended up back in private sales. He'd bought property that legally should have been returned to his father's estate. He owned land his father had died under. The implications hit him like a freight train. This facility, the evidence it contained, the documents, the proof of government negligence and cover-up, it was all his. And it was worth more than money. It was worth the truth. Owen was looking through more photographs. He stopped at one and went very still. "Uncle Marcus, this is important." Marcus joined him. The photograph showed a ceremonial ribbon cutting, government officials, military brass, all smiling for the camera in front of the facility entrance. Behind them, a sign. Project Sentinel Research Station, established 1968. But it wasn't the sign that made Owen's hands shake. It was one of the officials in the front row. Much younger, hair darker, but unmistakable. Senator Richard Hartwell, currently serving Montana senator, candidate for vice president in the upcoming election. He'd been there. He'd been part of this. Marcus pulled more files. Hartwell's name appeared again and again. He'd been a junior congressman in 1973, assigned to the Oversight Committee for Classified Research Projects. He'd signed off on the test that killed Marcus's father. He'd signed the orders to seal the facility and destroy records. And he'd built a political career on a foundation of lies and buried bodies. "We have to tell someone," Owen said. "We will," Marcus said quietly, "but we have to be smart about it. These people buried this once. They'll try to bury it again." They spent the rest of that day documenting everything. Marcus used his camera to photograph files, equipment, his father's letters. Owen helped organize documents, creating categories and timelines with the same systematic approach Marcus had taught him for schoolwork. By the time they climbed back out of the facility, darkness had fallen across the valley. They stood in the cold night air, breath steaming, looking at the open vault entrance. "What do we do now?" Owen asked. Marcus thought about Patricia's last visit, about her advice. Prove them wrong in a way they can't argue with. Show them something undeniable. He looked down at the files in his hands. Evidence of a government conspiracy. Proof his father hadn't abandoned his family, but had died trying to protect people from a dangerous experiment. Documents that could bring down a sitting senator and expose 50 years of lies. "Now," Marcus said, "we show the world that I'm not just some crazy hermit hiding from society. We show them why I don't trust the government, why I live off-grid. Why I know better than to believe what we're told." He put his arm around Owen's shoulders. "And we prove that a kid can not only survive up here, he can help uncover one of the biggest cover-ups in modern history." Owen looked up at him, eyes bright with something that might have been pride. "They're really going to hate us now, aren't they?" Marcus smiled, cold and sharp. "Yeah, kid, they really are." But it didn't matter. Because Marcus Webb wasn't afraid of powerful men anymore. He'd spent 8 years on this mountain learning to survive without their systems, their approval, their lies. And now he had something they'd tried to bury for 5 decades. He had the truth. And he was going to make damn sure everyone heard it. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table surrounded by files, his father's letters arranged in chronological order. He read each one again. This time not as an abandoned son, but as an engineer, understanding what his father had seen, what he'd tried to stop. The technical details in the letters painted a clear picture. Project Sentinel had been developing a new type of compact nuclear reactor designed for remote military installations. The technology was revolutionary for its time, portable power generation with minimal fuel requirements. But the containment system was experimental, untested, rushed. His father had documented every warning sign, pressure anomalies in the cooling system, hairline fractures in the containment vessel, radiation readings that spiked during stress tests. He'd filed report after report, each one ignored, each one stamped with approvals from people who cared more about deadlines than safety. And at the top of those approval chains, authorizing the final test, despite all warnings, was Congressman Richard Hartwell's signature. Owen woke around 3 in the morning and found Marcus still at the table, papers spread like a war map. "Can't sleep either?" the boy asked. Marcus looked up. "You should rest." "So should you." Owen sat down across from him. "What are you going to do with all this?" "I don't know yet. This is bigger than us, bigger than the custody fight or proving we can survive up here." Marcus touched one of his father's letters. 15 families were lied to. 15 people died because someone wanted political cover more than they wanted the truth. "Your dad tried to stop it," Owen said quietly. The letters say he refused to participate in the test. Yeah, and they probably locked him in anyway. Classified research facility, military jurisdiction. He couldn't just walk out. Marcus's voice was tight. He died trying to do the right thing, and they erased him like he never existed. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, my mom said you were a lot like him. Stubborn, smart, couldn't let things go when they were wrong. Marcus met the boy's eyes. Your mum was smarter than both of us. They sat in silence as the oil lamp flickered between them. Finally, Owen spoke again. Are you going to expose them? If I do, we'll have a target on our backs, not just the town council trying to take you away. Real power, federal power, the kind that makes people disappear. Owen's face was serious, too serious for an 8-year-old. But you're going to do it anyway, aren't you? Marcus thought about that, about the easy path. He could seal the vault back up, pretend he never found it, focus on keeping Owen safe and out of the system's reach. No one would ever know. The truth would stay buried for another 50 years. But then he thought about his father, about the man who'd sacrificed everything because he couldn't be part of a lie. And he thought about what he was teaching Owen every day. That integrity mattered. That truth mattered. That sometimes you had to stand up even when it was dangerous. Yeah, Marcus said finally, I am. Over the next 3 days, Marcus worked with military precision. He photographed every document, every piece of equipment, every corner of the facility. He created backups of backups, storing copies in waterproof containers buried at different locations around the property. He compiled a comprehensive report, technical analysis of what went wrong, timeline of warnings ignored, chain of command that led to the disaster. The facility yielded more secrets with each careful exploration. In one sealed room, Marcus found personal effects the cleanup crew had apparently missed or deliberately left behind. Wallets with family photos, a child's drawing tucked into a lab coat pocket, a birthday card, unopened, addressed to one of the scientists. These weren't just names on a classified roster. They were fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, people with lives outside these concrete walls, people whose families had spent 50 years not knowing. Marcus photographed each item with reverence. Owen helped him create an inventory, his young handwriting careful and precise as he documented each personal effect, matching them to the names they'd found in the personnel files. The boy worked with a solemnity that broke Marcus's heart. No 8-year-old should have to catalogue the remnants of tragedy. But Owen insisted. They deserve to be remembered properly, he said. In another room, they discovered the actual reactor chamber. It was smaller than Marcus expected, about the size of a shipping container, its surface scarred with blast marks and heat damage. The containment vessel had indeed failed, exactly as his father had predicted. Marcus could see the structural weaknesses even now, decades later. The welds were insufficient, the shielding inadequate. His father had been right about everything. He took detailed photographs, his engineering background allowing him to document the precise nature of the failure. This wasn't just historical evidence. This was proof of negligent homicide. Someone had approved a design they knew was flawed. Someone had pushed forward a test they knew was dangerous, and 15 people had paid with their lives. Owen helped organize everything, his young mind proving invaluable at connecting dots Marcus might have missed. The boy had a gift for patterns, for seeing how pieces fit together. He created a family tree of all 15 victims, tracking down their descendants through old phone books and public records in the town library's database when Marcus took him down for supplies. Uncle Marcus, Owen said one afternoon, looking up from his research. Some of these families are still here, in Red Pine. Mrs. Henderson at the library, her maiden name was Kowalski. That's one of the scientists who died. And the guy who runs the hardware store, his dad was chief of security for the facility. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. They don't know. Their families were probably told the same lies mine was. Should we tell them? Eventually. But first, we need to protect this information. Make sure it can't be buried again. That's when Marcus made his first call, to a man he'd served with in Afghanistan, Captain Jake Reeves, now a lawyer specializing in whistleblower cases. Marcus laid out everything, sent encrypted files through secure channels. Jake was silent for a long time after reviewing the material. "Marcus, do you understand what you have here? Government cover-up, negligent homicide, conspiracy. It's bigger than that. The reactor design in those files, if the technology was successfully refined, it's worth billions. Alternative energy applications, space exploration, medical isotope production, and it was developed with taxpayer money on government land. Those patents should be public domain." Jake paused. "But they're not, which means someone has been sitting on this technology for 50 years, someone who benefits from it staying secret." Marcus felt ice in his veins. "How do we move forward?" "Carefully, very carefully. I'll start filing FOIA requests, building a legal framework. But Marcus, the moment you go public with this, your life changes. Owen's life changes. Are you ready for that?" Marcus looked across the cabin at Owen, who was drawing diagrams of the facility's layout with remarkable accuracy. "We don't have a choice." "There's always a choice. Not when you're teaching a kid what it means to have a backbone. Not when 15 families deserve to know their loved ones didn't just abandon them or die in some training accident. Not when the people responsible are still in power." Marcus's voice hardened. "My father died trying to stop this. I'm not going to let that mean nothing." Jake was quiet for a moment. "All right, then we do this right. Document everything. Create an ironclad chain of custody for the evidence. Make multiple copies and store them with different trusted parties, and prepare for them to come after you with everything they've got." 2 days later, Patricia arrived for her scheduled visit. Marcus knew immediately something was different. She was early, and she wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit climbed out of the passenger seat, federal identification already in his hand. "Mr. Webb," Patricia said, her voice strained, "this is Agent Carlson from the Department of Energy. He needs to speak with you." Marcus stepped onto the porch, positioning himself between them and the cabin where Owen was pretending to read but definitely listening. About what? Agent Carlson was mid-40s, military bearing, eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Webb, we've become aware that you may have discovered certain property on your land, property that belongs to the United States government. I found a hole in my hillside after a mudslide. Turned out to be an old bunker. That bunker is classified, as is everything inside it. I need you to secure the site immediately and turn over any materials you may have removed." Marcus crossed his arms. "This is my property. I have the deed." "The facility beneath your property is federal land, held under national security protocols. Your surface rights don't extend to the structure." "That's an interesting interpretation. My lawyer disagrees." Carlson's expression hardened. "Mr. Webb, I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. That facility contains classified information relating to national defense. Removing materials from it is a federal crime. Possessing those materials is a federal crime, and I have the authority to seize them and charge you accordingly." Patricia looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Webb, perhaps we should all sit down and discuss this calmly." "I found something that was buried on my land," Marcus said evenly. "Something that explains what happened to my father 50 years ago. You can call it classified all you want, but the truth is, your government killed him and 14 others through negligence, then lied about it. That's not national security. That's conspiracy." Carlson stepped closer. "Where is the material you removed?" "In a safe place. I can get a warrant." "Go ahead. But you should know that copies of everything I found have already been provided to legal counsel and to certain journalists who specialize in government accountability. If anything happens to me or my nephew, it all goes public immediately." The agent's face remained impassive, but Marcus saw the calculation in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Webb. There are proper channels for this sort of thing." "The proper channels buried my father and erased him from history. Excuse me if I don't trust them." After they left, Patricia lingered. She looked tired, conflicted. "Marcus, what have you gotten yourself into?" "The truth. Something you said you wanted me to show everyone. Something undeniable. I meant prove that Owen is thriving up here, not start a war with the federal government. She glanced back at her vehicle. They're going to use this. The town, the county, they'll say you're putting Owen in danger, that you're involving him in something illegal. Owen accidentally mentioned finding something during your last visit, didn't he? That's how they knew. Patricia's silence was answer enough. It's okay, Marcus said. You were required to report it, I understand. I'm sorry. Don't be. This was always going to come out. Better now than never. After she left, Marcus went inside. Owen was standing by the window, face pale. They're going to try to take me away now, aren't they? Marcus knelt in front of him. They're going to try, but I won't let them. And now we have something they want. That gives us leverage. What if they just take it? Send soldiers or something? Then everyone will know they have something to hide. That's why I made copies. That's why other people know. This isn't just about us anymore, Owen. This is about 15 families who deserve the truth. That night, Marcus made more calls. To Jake Reeves again. To an investigative journalist named Sarah Chen who'd broken stories about government cover-ups before. To a documentary filmmaker who specialized in uncovering buried history. He sent them all copies of the files, encrypted and secure. By morning, the story was already spreading through networks that lived for exactly this kind of revelation. Within 48 hours, the first article appeared online. Hidden facility in Montana mountains may hold evidence of Cold War cover-up. It was tentative, careful, but it cited sources close to the discovery. It mentioned Project Sentinel. It raised questions about classified research programs and accountability. The town of Red Pine erupted. Some people were outraged that Marcus had withheld this from the community. Others were fascinated, suddenly seeing the hermit on the mountain as someone who'd uncovered something historically significant. The hardware store became ground zero for debate, locals arguing over coffee about whether Marcus was a hero or a troublemaker. But the real shift came when the families Owen had identified, descendants of the victims, started coming forward. Mrs. Henderson from the library showed up at the compound one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. My grandfather, she said. Thomas Kowalski. We were told he died in a training accident in Nevada. They said there was nothing to bury, that the accident was too catastrophic. Her voice broke. You're saying he was here, under this mountain the whole time? Marcus showed her the files, the photographs, her grandfather's personal effects, still in his bunk in the facility, a pocket watch engraved with his initials, a wedding ring that matched the one in her grandmother's jewelry box, the one the family had always assumed was a replacement because the original had been lost in the accident. She wept while Owen, with a gentleness that surprised Marcus, sat beside her and held her hand. The boy didn't say anything, just sat there, present, understanding in a way that only someone who'd lost parents could understand. More families came. The hardware store owner, Robert Chen, whose father had been chief of security. He arrived angry, suspicious, demanding proof. Marcus showed him everything. Robert stood in the cabin reading his father's final log entries, entries that described the reactor anomalies, the arguments between scientists and military brass, the growing fear that something terrible was about to happen. He knew, Robert said, his voice hollow. He knew it was going to fail, and he stayed anyway, because it was his job, because he was following orders. He looked at Marcus with tears in his eyes. My whole life I thought he'd abandoned us. Mom died thinking he'd run off. We had nothing. No benefits, no closure. Just a letter saying he'd died in Nevada with no remains to return. A woman from the next county whose uncle had been a lab technician, a man whose sister had been a project administrator. One by one they came, each carrying decades of unanswered questions, each finding pieces of truth they'd never thought they'd see. And with them came something Marcus hadn't expected. Support. The town council's narrative started to crack. People began asking different questions. If Marcus Webb had uncovered this, if he'd preserved the evidence when the government wanted it buried, maybe he wasn't crazy. Maybe he'd been right all along to distrust the system. Maybe a man who could survive 8 years off-grid and uncover a 50-year-old conspiracy was exactly the kind of person who could raise a kid properly. The local newspaper, the Red Pine Chronicle, ran a front-page story interviewing the families. Photos of them holding pictures of their lost loved ones standing in front of Marcus's compound. The headline read, "Local families find truth after 50 years. Hermit becomes hero." But the pressure from above intensified exponentially. 3 days after the first article, a convoy of federal vehicles rolled up the mountain. Not just Energy Department this time. FBI, DOD representatives, even a State Department liaison. They set up what amounted to a forward operating base at the property line, just beyond Marcus's legal boundary. Agent Carlson returned, this time with backup and briefcases full of legal threats. "Mr. Webb, you have 24 hours to turn over all materials removed from the classified site. Failure to comply will result in immediate arrest on federal charges. We will also be petitioning the court for emergency removal of your nephew pending resolution of these charges." Marcus stood his ground. "You can't have them, and you can't have him. Then you'll go to prison, and that boy will go into the foster system. Maybe. But before that happens, everything I found goes public. Every document, every photograph, every letter my father wrote warning that people would die. And everyone will know that Senator Hartwell signed off on the test that killed them." Carlson's expression flickered. "You're accusing a sitting senator." "I'm stating facts. His signature is on the authorization forms. I have copies, authenticated copies. You can try to spin it, but the evidence is clear." "You don't know what you're playing with here." "I know exactly what I'm playing with. The truth. The one thing your government hasn't been able to handle for 50 years. That evening, an unexpected ally arrived. A black SUV pulled up, and out stepped a woman in her 60s, silver hair cut short, carrying herself with unmistakable authority. Retired Colonel Janet Morrison, former Army JAG, now a civil rights attorney specializing in cases against government overreach. "Mr. Webb," she said, extending her hand, "I read about your situation. I'd like to help." "Why?" "Because I was stationed at a facility not unlike yours in 1981. We had a containment incident. 3 people died. The Army tried to bury it. I fought for 2 years to get the truth out, get the families compensated. I won, but barely." She looked toward the federal encampment. "They're going to try to crush you. You need someone who knows how they operate." Over the next week, Colonel Morrison built a legal fortress around Marcus and Owen. She filed injunctions preventing Owen's removal pending full custody review. She demanded congressional hearings on Project Sentinel. She reached out to other victims' families and organized them into a united front. And she made it clear to anyone watching that this wasn't just about one man anymore. This was about accountability. The media attention grew from a trickle to a flood. National news outlets picked up the story. Montana man uncovers father's death in secret government facility. Cable news ran segments. The hashtag #JusticeForSentinel started trending. People who'd never heard of Red Pine, Montana were suddenly demanding answers. Sarah Chen, the investigative journalist, published a comprehensive piece in a major national magazine. She'd interviewed the families, reviewed the technical documents, consulted with independent nuclear engineers who confirmed Marcus's father's warnings had been accurate. The reactor design was fundamentally flawed. The test should never have been authorized, and the people who'd made those decisions were still alive, still in power, still denying responsibility. And in the middle of it all was Owen, the 8-year-old who'd helped uncover the truth, who'd created timelines and family trees, who stood beside his uncle when federal agents tried to intimidate them. News cameras caught footage of the boy chopping wood, helping Marcus in the greenhouse, reading college-level physics books by lamplight. He became a symbol, proof that unconventional didn't mean unsafe, proof that sometimes the best education came not from classrooms but from life itself. Senator Hartwell issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, claiming he'd relied on expert advice when signing off on the test. But the documents Marcus had provided told a different story. They showed Hartwell had been specifically warned, had received the same reports Marcus's father had filed, and had chosen political expediency over safety. One memo, written by a safety inspector, explicitly stated, Congressman Hartwell was personally briefed on containment concerns. He expressed that political deadlines took precedence over additional testing delays. His poll numbers began to drop. His vice presidential prospects evaporated. Major donors pulled their support. And the closer the scrutiny came to his involvement, the more desperate the pressure on Marcus became. Late one night, Marcus's satellite phone rang. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. Mr. Webb, my name is Thomas Brennan. I'm calling on behalf of certain parties who would prefer to resolve this matter quietly. The voice was smooth, professional. We're prepared to offer you a settlement. $10 million, full custody of your nephew with no further challenges, all charges dropped. In exchange, you turn over the materials and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. $10 million, enough to secure Owen's future, to never worry again, to build a real life. No, he said. Mr. Webb, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. You want to bury this again. You want 15 families to never know what really happened. You want the people responsible to face no consequences. The answer is no. You're making enemies you can't afford to have. I've had plenty of practice. He hung up. The offer troubled him, though. Not because he was tempted, but because it meant they were worried. Really worried. Worried enough to offer serious money. Which meant the evidence was more damaging than he'd even realized. The next morning, Jake Reeves called with urgent news. Marcus, they're filing for an emergency custody hearing. They're going to argue that you're involving Owen in illegal activity, that the federal investigation creates an unsafe environment. The hearing is in 3 days. Can we win? Honestly, I don't know. But we're going to fight like hell. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of preparation. Colonel Morrison drilled Marcus on testimony. They assembled evidence of Owen's thriving school progress reports showing he was working 2 grade levels ahead, medical records showing excellent health despite the primitive living conditions, psychological evaluation from an independent child psychologist who found Owen to be well-adjusted, emotionally stable, and intellectually engaged. They also had testimonials from the families who'd visited the compound and seen how Owen and Marcus lived. From Mrs. Henderson, who said watching Owen help document her grandfather's belongings had shown her a child with more empathy and maturity than most adults. From Robert Chen, who'd hired Owen to help organize inventory at the hardware store and been astounded by the boy's mathematical abilities and work ethic. Even some of the townspeople who'd once condemned Marcus now stepped forward to defend him. The owner of the general store testified that Owen was polite, well-spoken, and clearly well cared for. A local doctor who'd treated Owen for a minor cut confirmed he was in excellent health. Even the librarian noted that Owen's reading comprehension and knowledge base far exceeded typical 8-year-old standards. But Marcus knew it wasn't about facts anymore. It was about power. About whether one man and one boy could stand against a system that had spent 50 years protecting its secrets. The night before the hearing, Marcus and Owen sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The federal encampment was lit up down the road, a reminder of what they were up against. "Are you scared?" Owen asked. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "Me too." The boy was quiet for a moment. "But I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we found the truth about your dad, about all of them." Marcus put his arm around Owen's shoulders. "Me too, kid. If they take me away tomorrow, I want you to know something." "Yeah?" "You're the best dad I could have asked for, even if you're technically my uncle." Marcus's throat tightened. He pulled Owen close, this boy who'd lost everything and still found the courage to stand for what was right. This boy who'd helped him discover not just a buried facility, but a buried piece of his own heart. "They're not taking you anywhere," Marcus said quietly. "I promise." But even as he said it, he knew promises couldn't always be kept. Not when you were fighting forces this powerful. not when truth and justice were on one side and political survival was on the other. All he could do was walk into that courtroom tomorrow and fight. Fight for Owen. Fight for his father's memory. Fight for the 15 families who deserved to know why their loved ones never came home. And hope that somewhere in the machinery of government and law there was still room for what was right to triumph over what was convenient. The compound was quiet that night. But down the road in the federal encampment, lights burned late, plans being made, strategies being coordinated, the full weight of government power preparing to crush one stubborn man who refused to let the past stay buried. Marcus didn't sleep. He stood watch, waiting for dawn, waiting for the fight that would determine everything. And in the darkness beneath the mountain, in that sealed facility where his father had died trying to do the right thing, the truth waited patiently. Because truth, Marcus had learned, was patient. It could wait 50 years, 100, forever if necessary, but once it was uncovered, once it saw light, nothing could bury it again. Not threats, not money, not power. The truth endured, and so would he. The courthouse in Billings was packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, news cameras set up in the back despite the judge's restrictions on recording. Marcus walked through the crowd with Colonel Morrison on one side and Owen on the other. The boy wore clean jeans and a button-down shirt Marcus had bought specifically for this day, but his boots were the same ones he'd worn to chop wood that morning. He hadn't wanted to pretend to be someone he wasn't. Judge Brennan presided again, the same woman who'd reluctantly granted Marcus temporary custody 9 months ago. But the courtroom atmosphere was entirely different now. This wasn't a routine custody case anymore. This was national news. Federal prosecutors sat on one side, grim-faced and armed with briefcases. Colonel Morrison and Jake Reeves sat on the other, equally prepared. Patricia Holders took the stand first. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Vance, questioned her about the conditions at Marcus's compound, the isolation, the lack of conventional amenities, the federal investigation. Miss Holders, in your professional opinion, is Owen Webb being raised in a safe environment? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Marcus watched her, saw her wrestling with something. Finally she spoke. When I first visited Mr. Webb's property, I was prepared to remove Owen immediately. I thought no child could thrive in those conditions. She paused. I was wrong. The prosecutor's expression flickered. Could you elaborate? Owen is one of the healthiest, most well-adjusted children I've encountered in 15 years of social work. He's physically fit, emotionally stable, academically advanced. He has a strong bond with his guardian. He's developing practical life skills most children never learn, and most importantly, he's happy. But the federal investigation, surely that creates an unsafe environment. Mr. Webb discovered evidence of historical wrongdoing. He's cooperating with legal authorities through proper channels. He hasn't involved Owen in anything illegal. If anything, he's teaching the boy about integrity and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Prosecutor Vance looked frustrated. The government contends that Mr. Webb is in possession of classified materials. The government also told 15 families that their loved ones died in Nevada when they actually died in Montana. Forgive me if I question their version of events. Patricia's voice was firm. I'm here to protect children. Owen Webb doesn't need protection from his uncle. He needs protection from people who would rip him away from the only stable home he's known since his parents died. The courtroom murmured. Judge Brennan banged her gavel. Order. Colonel Morrison stood for cross-examination. Miss Holders, how many home visits have you conducted? 8. And in those 8 visits, have you ever observed anything that concerned you about Owen's welfare? No, quite the opposite. Can you describe Owen's typical day? Patricia smiled slightly. He wakes early, helps prepare breakfast, spends mornings on academic work, mathematics, science, literature, history. His curriculum is more rigorous than most public schools offer. Afternoons are practical skills, building, repairing, learning survival techniques. Evenings are reading, discussion, sometimes stargazing. He's learning astronomy, geology, ecology through direct observation. Does he seem isolated, lonely? No. He has a regular interaction with community members. The families who visited the compound have all commented on his social skills, his empathy, his maturity. He's not isolated. He's just learning differently. When Owen took the stand, the courtroom went silent. The boy looked small in the witness chair, but he sat up straight, hands folded in his lap, meeting the judge's eyes without fear. "Owen," Judge Brennan said gently, "do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes, ma'am. You're deciding if I should stay with Uncle Marcus or go live somewhere else." "How do you feel about that?" "I want to stay with him. He's my family, and he's teaching me to be strong." Prosecutor Vance approached. "Owen, don't you miss having friends your own age? Television, video games?" "Sometimes I miss video games, but I'd rather know how to build a fire or identify animal tracks or understand why stars move across the sky." He paused. "Uncle Marcus says there's a difference between being entertained and being engaged. I'm learning to be engaged." "What about school? Don't you want to go to a real school?" "I am going to real school, just a different kind. Last week I read To Kill a Mockingbird, and we talked about justice and prejudice. I'm working through algebra. I can identify over 40 plant species and tell you which ones are edible. That's more real than sitting in a classroom memorizing things for tests." "But the federal agents, the investigation, doesn't that scare you?" Owen considered this. "Uncle Marcus found out what happened to his dad, my grandpa. He found out the government lied to our family for 50 years. Yeah, it's scary that powerful people want to bury that again. But Uncle Marcus says the truth matters more than being comfortable. I believe him." Judge Brennan leaned forward. "Owen, if you could live anywhere, do anything, what would you choose?" The boy didn't hesitate. "I'd choose to stay on the mountain with Uncle Marcus. I'd choose to keep learning the way I'm learning. I'd choose family over comfort, every single time." The hearing lasted 3 days. Expert witnesses testified about alternative education, child development, the psychological impact of unconventional living situations. The families of the Sentinel victims testified about Marcus's character, about how carefully he'd preserved their loved ones' belongings, about Owen's compassion and maturity. Robert Chen brought photographs of Owen helping organize hardware store inventory, solving complex spatial problems, explaining the physics of leverage to younger customers. Mrs. Henderson described how Owen had sat with her while she grieved, how he'd created a detailed catalogue of her grandfather's personal effects with more care than many professional archivists would show. Then the documentary filmmaker took the stand. David Park had arrived at the compound 2 weeks earlier with cameras and a crew. What he'd captured had already been viewed millions of times online. Footage of the underground facility, interviews with the families, and hours of Owen and Marcus simply living, chopping wood, working in the greenhouse, reading by lamplight, discussing philosophy and physics over dinner. "What struck me most," Park testified, "wasn't the facility or the government conspiracy. It was watching a man teach a boy not just how to survive, but how to think, how to question, how to stand for something. That's not neglect. That's the best parenting I've ever witnessed." The prosecution's case crumbled piece by piece. They tried to argue that the federal investigation created danger, but Colonel Morrison produced documents showing Marcus had cooperated fully, had never resisted legal process, had simply refused to surrender evidence that proved government wrongdoing. They tried to argue isolation was harmful, but the psychological experts testified that Owen showed none of the markers of isolation. In fact, he showed advanced social awareness and emotional intelligence. On the final day, Marcus took the stand. Prosecutor Vance went after him hard, trying to paint him as paranoid, anti-government, unstable. But Marcus remained calm, answering each question with quiet precision. "Mr. Webb, you don't trust the government, do they?" "I trust evidence. I trust facts. The government told my mother that my father abandoned us. The evidence shows he died trying to protect people. So no, I don't trust institutions that lie to families for half a century." "You live off-grid, away from society. Isn't that running away?" I live self-sufficiently because I learned the hard way that systems fail. But I'm not running from anything. I'm building something, a life based on truth and capability rather than convenience and deception. You involved your nephew in a dangerous situation. I taught my nephew to recognize injustice and stand against it. If that's dangerous, then every parent who teaches integrity is guilty. Colonel Morrison's questioning was brief. Mr. Webb, why did you take custody of Owen? Because he's family. Because he needed someone. Because I know what it's like to grow up thinking your father didn't want you. I couldn't let him live with that lie. What do you hope for his future? Marcus looked at Owen, sitting in the front row. I hope he becomes a man who thinks for himself, who doesn't accept easy answers, who has the skills to survive anything life throws at him and the integrity to fight for what matters. I hope he becomes everything his parents would have wanted him to be. The courtroom was silent when he stepped down. Judge Brennan recessed for deliberation. The wait was agonizing. Marcus and Owen sat on a bench outside the courtroom while news crews swarmed, Colonel Morrison ran interference, and the families who'd come to support them formed a protective circle. 4 hours later, they were called back in. Judge Brennan looked exhausted. She reviewed her notes, adjusted her glasses, and finally spoke. This has been one of the most unusual cases I've encountered in 23 years on the bench. When I granted temporary custody 9 months ago, I had serious doubts about Mr. Webb's ability to provide appropriate care for a traumatized child. I expected this hearing to result in removal and foster placement. Marcus felt Owen's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently. However, the judge continued, the evidence presented has thoroughly contradicted my initial concerns. Owen Webb is thriving in every measurable way. He's healthy, educated, emotionally stable, and clearly loved. Mr. Webb has demonstrated not only the ability to provide for Owen's basic needs, but to nurture his intellectual and emotional development in ways that exceed conventional standards. She paused. As for the federal investigation, the court finds no evidence that Mr. Webb has acted illegally or put Owen at risk. He discovered historical evidence on his own property and has pursued justice through legal channels. Teaching a child to stand for truth is not endangerment. It's good parenting. Marcus's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear. Therefore, I'm granting permanent custody to Marcus Webb. All restrictions are lifted. This placement is final. The courtroom erupted. Owen threw his arms around Marcus, and for the first time since the hearing began, Marcus felt tears on his face. The families cheered. Even Patricia was smiling, wiping her eyes. Outside the courthouse, news crews descended. Marcus made a brief statement. This was never about me. It was about a boy who deserved a home and 15 families who deserved the truth. Justice doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it looks like a mountain cabin and a kid learning to chop wood. Sometimes it looks like uncovering secrets powerful people wanted buried, but it's always worth fighting for. The victory in the courtroom was just the beginning. The media attention surrounding the custody case had amplified the Sentinel story beyond anything Marcus had anticipated. Within days, congressional representatives were demanding hearings. The Senate Armed Services Committee announced a formal investigation, and the families, now united and legally represented by Colonel Morrison, filed a class action lawsuit against the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense. Senator Hartwell resigned 3 weeks later, citing health reasons. But everyone knew the truth. The documents Marcus had uncovered had destroyed his political career and were threatening criminal charges. The man who'd signed off on a deadly test to meet political deadlines was finally facing consequences. In early spring, 6 months after the custody hearing, the settlement was announced. $240 million split among the 15 families. Full disclosure of all Sentinel documents, and a formal apology from the Department of Energy acknowledging the accident, the cover-up, and the pain inflicted on families who deserved better. Marcus's share, as his father's heir, was $16 million. More money than he'd ever imagined having, money he immediately knew he didn't want for himself. He sat with Owen at the kitchen table, the settlement letter between them. "What are you going to do with it?" Owen asked. He was 9 now, taller, his voice starting to lose its little kid quality. I was thinking about that, and I realized something. We've been given a gift, not just the money, but the chance to make sure this matters. To make sure my dad's death, all their deaths, lead to something good. Like what? Like helping other kids who need a different path. Kids in tough situations who need someone to believe in them. And teaching people the skills to be self-sufficient, to think for themselves, to not be so dependent on systems that might fail them. Owen's eyes lit up. You mean like a school? Not exactly a school, more like a program. Wilderness education, life skills, critical thinking. For kids in foster care, kids aging out of the system, veterans dealing with PTSD, anyone who needs to learn they're stronger than they think. Over the next year, Marcus built something remarkable. He purchased additional land surrounding his property, expanding to over 800 acres. He constructed several small cabins, each designed with the same self-sufficient principles as his own: solar power, water collection, wood heat. He built a central lodge for group meals and classroom instruction. He hired staff, veterans mostly, people who understood survival and resilience. The Sentinel Foundation opened in October of the following year. The first class of students arrived on a cool autumn morning, 12 teenagers from various foster situations, 2 young veterans, and 3 adults seeking to rebuild their lives after personal disasters. Owen, now 10, became the youngest teaching assistant, helping newcomers learn the basics Marcus had taught him. Watching the boy explain fire-building techniques to a 17-year-old former gang member, Marcus felt a pride that had nothing to do with blood relation and everything to do with character. The program was intense. 6 weeks of immersive learning. Not just survival skills, but critical thinking exercises, conflict resolution, team building, individual counseling. Participants learned to build shelters, purify water, identify plants, navigate by stars. But more importantly, they learned they were capable, that they mattered, that their past didn't define their future. Word spread quickly. Social workers started referring their most challenging cases, kids who'd failed in traditional foster homes, who'd been written off as too damaged or too difficult. Marcus took them all. Because he understood something the system didn't. Sometimes people didn't need to be fixed. They needed to be believed in. Patricia Holders became one of the Foundation's biggest advocates. She visited regularly, referring kids from her caseload, volunteering during summer sessions. One afternoon, she found Marcus on the porch of the main cabin, watching a group of students practice shelter construction. "I owe you an apology," she said, sitting beside him. "You already apologized, at the hearing." "No, I mean a real one. I saw you and saw all my preconceptions about what made a good parent. Traditional home, traditional education, traditional life. I almost destroyed something beautiful because I couldn't see past my own assumptions." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You were doing your job, protecting kids." "I was protecting my idea of what kids needed. There's a difference." She watched a girl, maybe 15, successfully start a fire without matches and whoop with joy. "You've changed more lives in 2 years than I have in my entire career." "You changed mine. You could have made that custody fight hell. You didn't. You told the truth even when it contradicted what you'd believed." Patricia smiled. "Learned that from you." By the 3rd year of operation, the Sentinel Foundation had served over 200 participants. The success stories were remarkable. Kids who'd been failing out of school were graduating, attending college, starting businesses. Veterans who'd been struggling with PTSD were finding purpose again. Adults who'd lost everything were rebuilding their lives with newfound confidence. But for Marcus, the real success was quieter. It was watching Owen, now 12, lead a navigation exercise with patience and skill. It was receiving letters from former participants, thanking him for seeing potential when no one else had. It was the memorial they'd built on the property, a stone monument listing the 15 Sentinel victims, their names finally honored rather than erased. The government had released the reactor technology patents to the public domain as part of the settlement. Within a year, 3 separate companies were refining the designs, developing safer, more efficient versions. The technology Marcus's father had died trying to perfect was finally being used to benefit humanity. Compact power generation for remote medical clinics, emergency energy systems for disaster relief, research applications that could advance clean energy development. His father's work wasn't buried anymore. It was changing the world. On the 5th anniversary of finding the vault, Marcus stood at the memorial with Owen, now 13 and nearly as tall as Marcus himself. The boy had grown into someone remarkable, confident without arrogance, capable without boasting, thoughtful and principled in ways that reminded Marcus of his sister. "You know what's weird?" Owen said, running his fingers over his grandfather's name carved in stone. "I never met him, but I feel like I know him, through the letters, the work, what you've told me. You're a lot like him, actually. Smart, stubborn, can't let things go when they're wrong." Owen smiled. "Mom used to say that about you." She wasn't wrong. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Owen said something that made Marcus's chest tight. "I'm glad you're my dad." Marcus looked at him. Owen had never called him that before, always Uncle Marcus, even as their relationship had deepened into something that felt exactly like father and son. "Not uncle?" Owen shook his head. "You've been my dad since that courtroom 5 years ago, since before that, really, since you showed up and said you wanted me. I just didn't know how to say it." Marcus pulled him into a hug, this kid who'd lost everything and somehow found the strength to build himself into someone extraordinary. "I'm glad you're my son." That evening, the foundation held its annual gathering. Current participants, alumni, staff and supporters filled the main lodge. The families of the Sentinel victims came every year, a reunion of sorts. Mrs. Henderson brought her famous pierogi. Robert Chen donated tools and supplies. Even some of the townspeople who'd once called Marcus crazy now volunteered regularly. Sarah Chen, the journalist who'd first broken the Sentinel story, had become a friend and frequent visitor. Her investigative work had led to broader reforms in how classified programs were overseen, how families of government employees were informed about workplace deaths, how whistleblowers were protected. She stood now, filming the gathering for a documentary update. "5 years ago," she said into the camera, "I came to Montana to investigate a government cover-up. What I found was something more profound. A man who refused to let injustice stand. A boy who helped uncover truth, and a community that formed around the simple idea that integrity matters more than convenience." Marcus watched from the edge of the room as Owen helped serve dinner, joking with a 17-year-old girl who'd arrived 2 weeks ago, silent and scared, now laughing. That transformation happened again and again in this place. People arrived broken and left whole, not because Marcus fixed them, but because he gave them space to fix themselves. Colonel Morrison approached, now a permanent advisor to the Foundation's legal operations. "You've built something remarkable here, Marcus. We built it. You, Jake, Sarah, all the families. I just started the conversation. You did more than that. You proved that the system can be challenged, that one person with truth on their side can move mountains." She smiled. "Literally, in your case." As the evening wound down and people drifted toward the cabins, Marcus and Owen walked back to their original home, the cabin where it had all started. The place looked different now, surrounded by other structures, paths worn into the hillside, signs of community where once there'd been only isolation. But it was still home. They sat on the porch as they had countless times before, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Dad," Owen said, the words still new and wonderful, "do you ever regret it? Going public with everything? We could have had a quiet life." Marcus thought about that, about the easy path he could have taken. Seal the vault, take the settlement money, disappear into comfortable obscurity. "No," he said finally. "Your grandfather died trying to stop something wrong. Your mum raised you to think for yourself. And my job is to make sure you become a man who doesn't back down when it matters. We did the right thing. It wasn't easy, but it was right." "What do you think Grandpa would say if he could see all this?" Marcus looked out at the compound, at the lights glowing in cabin windows, at the memorial standing silent in the moonlight. I think he'd say we honored his sacrifice, that we made it mean something. Owen nodded slowly. Then, I want to be an engineer, like him, like you used to be. Yeah? Yeah, but not weapons. I want to design systems that help people, clean water, sustainable energy, things that matter. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He'd be proud of that. I'm proud of that. The years that followed brought continued growth. The Sentinel Foundation expanded its programs, adding advanced wilderness medicine training, sustainable agriculture education, even a scholarship fund for participants who wanted to pursue higher education. Owen worked at the foundation every summer through high school, eventually designing improvements to the cabin infrastructure, applying engineering principles to make the systems more efficient. When he was accepted to MIT on a full scholarship to study environmental engineering, Marcus felt a complex mix of pride and bittersweet loss. But watching Owen pack for college, seeing the confident young man he'd become, Marcus knew they'd succeeded. They'd taken tragedy and trauma and transformed it into purpose and strength. The night before Owen left, they hiked to the ridge above the compound, the same ridge where Marcus had stood alone for so many years before the boy arrived. They watched the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I'm coming back, Owen said. After college, I want to work here, help expand what we've built. You don't have to decide that now. You've got your whole life ahead of you. I know, but this place, what we've created here, it matters. It's where I learned who I am, and I want to help other kids learn that too. Marcus put his arm around his son's shoulders. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. Your mom would be too. She'd be proud of you for taking a chance on a scared kid, for fighting when it would have been easier to give up, for turning pain into purpose. They stood in silence as darkness fell and stars emerged, the same stars Marcus had watched alone for so many years, the same stars he'd taught Owen to navigate by, the same stars that would guide whatever came next. 10 years after that custody hearing, Marcus Webb stood before a congressional committee. They'd asked him to testify about alternative education models, about pathways for at-risk youth, about the long-term impacts of the Sentinel Foundation's work. He was 63 now, grey-haired and weathered, but strong, still capable of splitting wood and hiking ridgelines that left younger men winded. Mr. Webb, the committee chair said, your foundation has served over 800 individuals. Your success rate, measured by education completion, employment, and lack of recidivism, is remarkable. What's your secret? Marcus thought about that. About the scared boy who'd arrived on his mountain a decade ago. About the vault that had held his father's secrets and unlocked his family's truth. About all the broken people who'd found their way to his compound and left whole. No secret, he said. Just belief. I believe people are capable of more than the systems that fail them suggest. I believe truth matters more than comfort. I believe sometimes the most valuable things are buried deepest, and sometimes the people society rejects are exactly who we need. He paused. And I believe that family isn't just blood. It's choosing to show up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Later, after the testimony, he called Owen, now working on sustainable energy projects in Colorado. How'd it go? Owen asked. Same as always. Politicians asking questions they already know the answers to. Owen laughed. You coming out to visit next month? I want to show you the new solar array design I'm working on. I think Grandpa would have appreciated it. Wouldn't miss it. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son. Marcus Webb's story wasn't about finding a vault worth millions or exposing government corruption, though those things happened. It wasn't even about winning a custody battle against impossible odds, though that happened too. It was about a man who'd given up on the world, finding a reason to re-engage. About a boy who'd lost everything discovering he was stronger than he knew. About secrets buried for half a century, finally seeing light. About choosing truth over convenience, integrity over comfort, and love over fear. The mountain that had been his refuge became his purpose. The nephew who'd been thrust into his life became his son, and the vault that had held his father's final moments became the foundation for a legacy that would outlast them all. Anyone can change the world if they're brave enough to dig for truth and strong enough to stand for what's right when everything says to walk away. As the sun set over the Montana mountains one more time, Marcus Webb sat on his porch, watching new students arrive at the foundation compound. They came scared, broken, unsure. They'd leave capable, confident, whole, because one man had refused to accept that a child couldn't survive in the wilderness, because one boy had helped uncover truth powerful people wanted buried, because sometimes the most extraordinary things grow from the most unlikely places. The hermit had become a hero. The outcast had become a father. The buried secret had become a beacon. And the mountain that society said was too harsh for a child became home to hundreds who learned that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about thriving, about building, about becoming. They said you can't keep a kid alive up there. Marcus Webb didn't just keep Owen alive. He helped him become exactly who he was meant to be. And in doing so, he proved that sometimes the people everyone doubts are the ones who change everything. The vault is sealed now, preserved as a historical site, a reminder of what happens when ambition overrides safety, when secrecy trumps accountability. But its discovery opened something far more valuable: the truth. And truth once freed echoes forever. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the most valuable discoveries aren't what we find, but who we become while searching.